Until 400 years ago, Eurasian cranes were widespread in Britain, thriving in wild wetlands and swampy forests. But these magnificent birds were driven to extinction here by extensive drainage of their homes and relentless hunting for their meat. Today, an ambitious project involving a team of conservationists from the UK and Germany is seeking to bring wild German crane eggs back to the UK and to release chicks in Somerset, where cranes last lived in medieval times. The mission of returning these charismatic birds to the West Country will be overseen by Damon Bridge, the Great Crane Project manager.
To get this bird back and breeding in Somerset will be an incredible achievement, and hopefully will reconnect a lot of people with this wetland habitat. And this project, we're going to put them back, bring them back where they used to be.
With funding from Viridor credits, the dream of reintroducing cranes onto the Somerset levels and moors can finally be realised. Much of this vast wetland area is already managed for wildlife alongside farming, and this landscape offers all that cranes need.
The extensive moors and the hay meadows and pasture lands are absolutely stuffed with lots of spiders, grasshoppers, worms, all sorts of things during the crucial period, the spring and the summer.
Before cranes could be reintroduced to Somerset, rearing techniques first developed in the US were honed in the UK, following an initiative by the Pensthorpe Conservation Trust, and were then practised here at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust at Slimbridge, initially with chicks from captive bred eggs. To be sure they don't imprint on people, they're fed from model adult crane heads by foster parents hiding their human shape in grey smocks. They're shown what's good to eat and are given lots of exercise. Raising healthy, well-balanced cranes from wild eggs will be crucial to the project's ultimate success. And this process will be overseen by Nigel Jarrett.
We want populations of cranes widespread throughout the UK, as they once were, and we're bringing all of the skills of the different organisations together to bring back an iconic species.
The Great Crane Project will add momentum to a natural return that began in 1979, when some lost migrants dropped into a Norfolk Broads estate and stayed. Fortunately, the land was managed by wildlife filmmaker John Buxton, who's watched over them and nurtured their progress ever since.
When the first cranes came, a chap who was our tenant farmer rang me up because he'd seen what he described as the biggest bloody herons he'd ever seen. I went down to the marshes, and there, sure enough, was a pair of cranes.
Over the next few years, John captured some historic moments on film as they began to breed. And he recorded the first British-fledged crane for 400 years taking flight. This small Norfolk population, though, has grown and spread very slowly. And 30 years on, fewer than 20 pairs breed in the east of England. The Great Crane Project is needed to boost numbers to a secure level. In April 2010, the project moves up a gear as the mission to collect wild eggs from Germany begins. The Schorfheide Korin Biosphere Reserve near Berlin combines wild woodland and rolling organic farmland. Its many wetland hollows are overflowing with breeding cranes. German crane expert Beate Blahy leads the project team to many nests deep in the swamps.
The population in the Biosphere Reserve has more or less 450 breeding pairs, and that is still growing. And some couples disturb each other, and so you can't say that if you take away 30 eggs maximum per year, that it will affect the population in any negative way.
To select eggs of the right age, they're weighed and measured by Great Crane Project aviculturist Roland Digby.
97.4.
But how will the cranes react to losing their eggs?
They will be very surprised, badly surprised, of course, and they will cry loudly for 2 days. After then, they think about, what shall we do? It's early enough in the year, we'll relay a new clutch and start again. For me, it is a really exciting project to help to build up a new population in Great Britain, and it is also a chance to give our cranes a new homeland.
Everything seems to be going smoothly. As the project progresses, they're hoping to never take eggs from the same pair again, and that means we get great diversity of genetics within the population in Somerset.
Once collected, the eggs are washed in disinfectant and inspected by a German vet. And the crucial export papers are stamped. The delicate eggs now begin a long and complex journey to the UK.
The airport was just very nerve-wracking because we had an incubator with little flashing lights and wires attached to a battery. We were waiting at any moment to be accosted by officials, but it didn't happen, amazingly.
Despite the concerns, the eggs leave Germany without a hitch, and they travel safely to a brand new facility at WWT Slimbridge.
These sheds have been purpose-built for cranes, for baby cranes. The eggs actually hatched within these sheds, and the babies were reared for the first fortnight or so indoors. It went far better than we expected. We collected 25 eggs, 24 of which were viable, and they all went on to hatch, and that was beyond our wildest expectation.
The chicks must be protected from germs and remain unaware of humans until release. Biosecurity is really tight, and disinfectant foot baths protect each area of the rearing facility. The chicks only see people wearing grey smocks and hoods and never hear human voices. But they do hear natural sounds. Birdsong, recorded in Somerset, is played back from a CD running on a loop. And dictaphones emit a parent crane's contact call at feeding time. The chicks learn that this call means food. So when the foster parents introduce them to an outside pen, the ever-hungry chicks follow, wherever they're led. Down in Somerset, a cartload of volunteers have come to help Damon complete work on a much bigger enclosure built on pasture land. The young cranes will acclimatise in a covered area here when they arrive. And time is tight.
I think we're just about on track for getting everything done. There's involved a lot of work, a lot of volunteers, and we just needed a lot of people pulling in the same direction, really. And being a net, of course, it just wants to get caught on absolutely anything. But it went up surprisingly well.
The perimeter is electric fenced to keep foxes out. The newly completed enclosure must be up to standard. So Roland Digby and Amy King, the cranes' foster parents, come to inspect. The birds they're rearing back at Slimbridge are almost ready for liftoff. Amy and Roland check the Somerset pen is secure before the cranes arrive.
It's looking good. These birds always find things to pick at. They're very inquisitive, so there's just a few things that need last-minute touches. But in general, it's a great pen. We're really pleased with it, and I think they really enjoy it down here.
As transfer day approaches at Slimbridge, the voracious youngsters are shown where to find good feeding. Grain spread around adult crane decoys trains the birds to look for food near them. And similar decoys are placed in the Somerset landscape at sites where there's lots of natural food.
They'll be able to find those decoy cranes and then start feeding. That's the plan, anyway.
The young birds are quick learners. Already they're finding wild food for themselves in the Slimbridge pen. And they're showing a lot of character.
Compared to other species that I've worked with, these definitely have more individual characteristics. It is difficult not to have favourites.
To have 21 at this stage is just fantastic. Obviously, there's things that may happen, may go wrong when they get here.
A few days later, the young cranes are rounded up to begin their new lives. Before their move to Somerset, the birds are given some special accessories to wear. GPS transmitters are attached with harnesses to some, and all the birds get radio tags so they can be tracked after release. Colour rings are added for easy identification. Once the team is sure everything fits well, the cranes are good to go, and they're loaded into travel crates.
It's going to be quite sad to see them leave. This has been a round-the-clock operation for the last 3 months, and suddenly it's all going to come to an end and the action is going to move to Somerset.
So the young cranes migrate 60 miles down the motorway to their new home on the levels and moors. The birds must be transferred to the roofed pen, where they'll live for a few weeks before flying free. But how have they coped with the trip, and how will they take to their new environment?
When the birds come out of the boxes, they're going to be a little bit like anybody waking up in the middle of the night and putting on a light switch. What's really important is that they see Mum and Dad, Amy and Roland, in a costume. I think seeing those two people in a new environment will immediately give them a flood of well-being. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's as if they've always been here.
They look very settled too, aren't they?
Yeah. Now this is their new home. I like it. These birds will be flying out of here in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. Yeah.
So far so good then, but freeing them to the wild will be a much bigger deal. When release day arrives, it's very windy. So can Damon's team go ahead?
I was a bit concerned, but we were so keen to get them out and felt that the birds were really ready for it as well.
What we were hoping for them to do was to go out and explore, not go too far.
It was just fantastic to see them kind of out, and the first one that got the wind under its wings and took off, it did kind of head downwind quite a bit. It was a major heart-stopping moment though, it really was, especially when it disappeared behind the trees. But it was wonderful to see it reappear and then come back in, and flying so strongly. To have the control they had, it just amazed me.
They knew how to use the wind, definitely. I think when it dropped down in the field just out there near the pen, it was a real relief.
They did look like they were really enjoying having a proper flight. It's the first time they've really been able to get some height. In this wind, it did look a little bit worrying at times when we thought they were going to land a bit dodgy, but they were okay, it was all good.
The cranes are no longer under a secure net and could fly away, but they linger in the outer enclosure, a safe haven, until they're familiar with the wild world beyond the fence. These youngsters may have found their wings, but they'll still need a lot of guidance in the weeks ahead. So the team begins leading them out of the enclosure a couple of times a day to introduce the young birds to the great outdoors, and the cranes soon begin to explore more widely. They're shown the best places to find food in the fields and around decoys where they've learnt to look for grain. And the youngsters encounter some other Somerset residents. But they can still return to Mum and Dad when they feel threatened. They soon learn the lie of the land and start to find their own way home. But have they learnt enough to cope alone in the future?
We feel quite proud of them for getting to this stage, and they pick up everything that we teach them quite quickly. So you sort of feel a sense of pride that you've been involved in that.
As the cranes become increasingly independent and range more widely, keeping track of them becomes vital.
These birds can be anywhere over a 10-mile radius. So what we always try and do is get to the top of a hill and see what directions we can pick the signals up from. These are the most important three to keep track of at the minute because they're no longer roosting in a fox-proof area, so we really do like to keep track of them every day. The release doesn't just stop once you let the birds go, it's an ongoing thing. It's only by seeing what areas they're using for foraging that we can make sure that this release is a really successful one.
And as autumn advances, the cranes explore the levels and moors in search of insects, which have become a favourite food. And satellite tracking data tell Damon where some birds go day or night.
Each of these pins represents a specific bird, so we can see exactly where the cranes have been. This whole site here is an area they've been roosting at night. This bird, green, blue, red, which is Michael, you can see that he was here right in the middle of the night. You can also then see that following the lines out from him that he's moved out during the day to this ryegrass field where they've been sort of probing around.
But the time of autumn plenty ends suddenly as winter comes early and very hard. With temperatures falling to record lows for the southwest, how will the birds react?
The cranes have been coping remarkably well with it. They are well adapted to cope with very cold conditions. We've been putting out a bit of extra food just to make sure that they don't suffer during this cold snap.
But other dangers threaten the young cranes.
One unfortunately flew into some power lines and was killed pretty much instantly. That was a real shock and something we're still getting used to. If we find that there's a very regular pattern of them flying over a particular set of wires, we'll look to work with the electricity company to try and get some markers on, because they can be very effective.
The youngsters are vulnerable. A second one goes missing, and Damon is keen for them to be watched carefully.
We've built up a really good team of volunteers who come in on a regular basis to find the birds every day, gathering a lot of information on the birds themselves, their welfare, but also the habitat they're using.
Crane monitoring can be cold work, but they seem happy.
I've got loads of layers on, I'm fine. I'm as warm as toast.
It's a privilege to be part of this project, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
The Arctic weather raises a new problem as all standing water ices over. But the cranes find that they can drink from the river, which doesn't freeze completely, showing good instincts for young birds with no parents.
I think they're doing okay, actually. They're a lot stronger than we kind of anticipated. 7 months ago, there were these tiny little fluffy things coming out of eggs, and it's just amazing how much they've learnt and how much they've developed. Just seeing them out there, especially when they're in flight with a beautiful sky in the background, it blows me away every single time. You don't get bored of it.
The flock also attracts the interest of local farmers, whose help becomes crucial to the project.
I've been feeding the cranes virtually daily since October. Christmas Day, for example, the temperature here was down to -14, but I still fed the cranes, and I think they appreciated it. I brought my grandchildren down to see the cranes, and I said, "You're the first person that has seen cranes in Somerset for 400 years." And they were absolutely thrilled by that, and they've taken that back to school and told their schoolmates about it.
Another local farmer, Roderick Hector, has come round to appreciating the reintroduction.
When I heard the cranes were coming, I wasn't quite sure how they would fit in after being away for so long, but it seems to be going quite well. Oh, we love the birds, actually, yeah. We like to hear them in the morning when they come over. We really enjoy, seeing them, and they waste a lot of time, actually, because we can't keep our eyes off the things. They don't affect us at all. In no way with the grassland. They're after the worms and the leather jackets, creeping buttercup, and celandine. They're taking those. I like nature. I've always been interested in birds, and I feel that we farmed intensively in the past, and now we're putting something back by farming less intensively.
In the spring of 2011, another friend of the cranes meets up with Damon.
It is, yeah, I think we might be able to get a few of them down over this way.
Nigel Jarrett comes to see how the birds he reared are doing.
Oh yeah, I've got some.
You can see about half a dozen of them, I think, not all of them, but they all look pretty relaxed, don't they?
Yeah. And all together as a group, there are 5 or 6 birds that just stood in one spot feeding, so there's obviously a lot of food to be had.
Yes.
They look really fit
Yeah.
and strong. Oh, they're going to dance?
Oh yeah, there's a couple chasing.
Well, chasing, yeah.
They're chasing down the nearly down.
Oh, there you go, look at them dancing.
That's fantastic. I love seeing them dancing.
Yeah, it's like they're just sort of exhilarated by being here. The Somerset levels, I think, have always needed cranes. You've got this fantastic wetland on a day like today. Just look at all the water bodies shining in the sun, and to see cranes marching across these wetlands is just amazing. It's exactly how I imagined it, and it's like a bit of a dream, you know.
The return of the cranes is also inspiring more and more of the local community. Damon visits Somerset schools regularly to involve children in creative projects and to report on the birds' progress.
I wanted to thank you all for championing Gilbert. Gilbert's doing very well. He discovered a field, it's got some slurry irrigation. And Gilbert discovered this and went around pulling up these pooey worms, which was fantastic.
As the children work on their model cranes, Damon tells them more about the real birds.
So if one was looking at you, it would be just here. Put that bit on there.
Some of the school's crane-inspired artwork goes on display at Slimbridge and other local venues. The Great Crane Project is starting to get noticed, and plans are already in place for further releases.
About this time next year, there'll be another lot of cranes out and about with this lot. At the moment, those cranes are eggs. They've just been laid in Germany, and those eggs will come back in about 3 weeks' time, be hatched, grow into big chicks, and then will be released just like this lot were a year ago.
We've got 17 birds this year, and they've started sticking together as a group a little bit more and looking out for one another. So in the next couple of weeks, they should be very much ready to go down to Somerset, which is exciting for us.
A week or so later, the new batch of cranes is settling into its temporary home in Somerset, and soon attracts attention from the older birds.
This is the first time the younger birds had ever seen wild, adult-looking cranes. We knew at that point there was no real harm that could come of it, but we were keen to get the younger birds out.
And soon afterwards, on an early excursion, they're taught a vital lesson that humans must be avoided.
I'd been hiding in some bushes, and then I appeared all of a sudden, and Amy played an alarm call and ran back to the safety of the enclosure away from me, and the birds all followed. You can only really carry out these scares so many times, because nothing bad actually happens at the end of them.
Within a week of release, the youngsters begin to take themselves out to feed, but competition for food here is about to get tougher. The older birds soon come in and challenge them for grain. This is a dangerous time for the youngsters. Crane beaks can be lethal.
There was a lot of fighting for the first couple of days. There was a few scary moments where the more dominant younger ones decided that they were going to pick a fight with the bigger older ones, and they did definitely get put in their place. So it was a bit nerve-wracking to watch.
The cranes are generally not nice to each other. They establish this hierarchy through threatening each other, stabbing each other, and once they've got that established, they can get on peacefully, but they do need to go through this process to develop the pecking order.
Once the aggression calms down, mixing with the older birds proves to have advantages.
What's great about this year of release particularly is that the young birds are picking up lots of clues from the older birds about what it means to be a crane. How to react when some danger comes along, when they should fly off. All of these things they seem to be learning from the older birds. Compared to last year, the new birds are going at least 4 times as far away from the release enclosures. They're finding natural food sources along with the older birds, so it's been a much more rapid integration into the landscape here.
The cranes mostly forage just a mile or so from their roost, increasingly on grain crops left unharvested for them and on leftovers in stubble. But they are capable of going a lot further. One of the young cranes goes its own way and incredibly flies nearly 200 miles to Kent, where she may have joined some adults seen there on migration to Europe. Damon keeps close track of the remaining youngsters as they begin to roost outside the enclosure with the older birds. This is a vital part of their learning process, but it's also dangerous. And for one juvenile, a fox in the night proves lethal.
We had some fairly sad news a week ago. One of the cranes was found dead out on a site near to where it had been roosting. It's not really a surprise. We really had expected this to happen much more frequently.
But the loss is offset in a surprising way. Among the released birds coming to a maize field is a wild migrant crane, a young unringed adult.
We think it's very likely to stay with these birds now all winter, and if it sticks with our birds and forms a pair with one of them, it may be one of the first birds to attempt to breed. It is very often one of the first to react to danger, which is great, because that's really helping to teach all our birds and make them much, much more wary and more likely to survive. It's actually made the group much harder to get near to, which is a pain for monitoring. Now you can't get within 300 metres.
Even though they're tough to get close to, the increasingly noisy cranes attract ever more public interest.
We're looking at ways of getting people to see the birds in a sustainable way that doesn't disturb the birds and feeds into the local economy. There we have it. Oh, look at that, that's brilliant. You can see the whole lot there. So they're all spread out really between the gate and the hopper there.
Oh, I see more cranes than I've ever seen in my life before.
It's so exciting to see cranes back in their ancient home, and to think now that they're actually here, living wild, is fantastic. It really is.
Thanks to the project's careful fostering, nearly 90% of the released birds have survived. Much better than cranes fledged in the wild. And everyone involved is thrilled to have the cranes back.
When you think about future generations enjoying these birds, being part of the beginning of that is a really exciting thought, so I'm really proud to be part of the project.
I think that it's well worth just investing a few years of our life to get something back onto our landscape that hopefully is going to be here forevermore.
It's what we signed up for, it's what we're here to do, it's get cranes on the levels. You can imagine it in 5 years' time of hopefully seeing them nesting, breeding, and maybe if you're lucky enough seeing them with a chick in tow.
And just 18 months after being released, the older birds are showing the first signs of courtship. But that's as far as it goes for now.
We're hoping that these birds will breed possibly next year, maybe a couple more years until we see the first successful breeding. What we really hope to achieve by the end of the next 10-15 years is to have cranes breeding back in their former habitats throughout the UK outside of the levels and moors. The biggest thing is leaving a legacy for the future. People will be able to see these birds forever from this point on. That's a remarkable thing to have been involved in.